Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. 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 How good it is to be together. You are probably already picking up on the fact that I am on a solo mission this morning due to scheduling changes, all for good reasons and joyful reasons. I am on my own. And so I am going to sing loudly and hope that you are singing loudly in your places. We will lack the benefit of Barbara or Cantor Simmons' guitar and beautiful voices this morning. And as a result, I will be bringing more poetry than usual because no one is here to stop me. But we'll have a little bit more of a reedy service and a little bit less of a singing service as a result, but there will still be opportunities for music. And I really do hope that you will support me wherever you are by praying and singing along loudly and joyfully and intentionally. If you are wanting to follow along in our prayer book, if you have a prayer book at home, I will call out page numbers. If you are following along in the flip book that Jason, I think, so helpfully put in the chat, you can do that as well. If I'm having technical difficulties and you're having trouble hearing me, I hope you will write that in the chat, and I will do my very best to monitor the chat, particularly on Facebook and our website, and we'll just have to do the best we can. But that is my motto for the entirety of pandemic. So we are going to dive right in with the words of Ma Tovu, which are found on page 74. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. 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 I have three themes for the poetry this morning that I think are all interrelated. Theme number one is the theme of is the theme of spring. Theme number 2 is the theme of beginnings. And 3 is peace. Hoping we will talk this morning through our prayers and our poetry about those themes of beginnings, spring, and peace. And as we prepare to thank God for our bodies with the words of Asher Yatzar, I want to offer you this poem called Evidence by Mary Oliver. Where do I live? If I had no other address, as many people do not, I could nevertheless say that I live in the same town as the lilies of the field and the still waters. Spring, and all through the neighborhood now there are strong men tending flowers. Beauty without purpose is beauty without virtue. But all beautiful things inherently have this function, to excite the viewers toward sublime thought. Glory to the world, that good teacher. Among the swans there is none called the least or the greatest. I believe in kindness, also in mischief, also in singing, especially when singing is not necessarily prescribed. As for the body, it is solid and strong and curious and full of detail. It wants to polish itself. It wants to love another body. It is the only vessel in the world that can hold in a mix of power and sweetness, words, song, gesture, passion, ideas, ingenuity, devotion, merriment, vanity, and virtue. Keep some room in your heart for the unimaginable. The words of Asher Yatzar are a blessing for the body, are found on page 77. Thought we'd look at the Hebrew today, and but also this is one of those 76 rather. This is one of those few pages in Mishkan Tefillah in this prayer book where I feel like the translation doesn't actually do justice to the beauty of the Hebrew, because the Hebrew has so much both that is about theology, but that is also deeply rooted in our bodies in this prayer to say. Prayer says, Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, God. Eloheinu melech haolam, our God who is the ruler of everything. Asher yatzar ha'adam b'chokhmah, you have made human beings in wisdom. Uvara vo nekavim nekavim chalolim chalolim, you made us full of openings upon openings and hollow places, closed off areas upon closed off areas. Galui yadua lifnei kiseh kivodecha, it is well known as we stand in your presence, she'im yifatech echad mehem o yisater echad mehem, that if one of those openings were to be closed, or if one of those closed places were to be open, efshar lehit kayem v'la'amod lefanecha, it would be impossible for us to continue, and certainly impossible for us to stand before you. So knowing that our bodies, however well they are working, have brought us to this moment, carried us to this day, and allow us to stand and be together in prayer, then we say, Baruch atah Adonai, rofecho basar umafli la'asot, blessed are you, God, you heal all of us, and you do wondrous things in us and through us. With that, we move to a blessing for our souls that fill our bodies. A reminder that in Judaism there is not a separation between our spirits and our bodies, but a flow and an interplay between them. These words of Elohai Neshama on page 78. Elohai Neshama shenatata bi tehorahi, Elohai Neshama shenatata bi tehorahi, Elohai Neshama shenatata bi tehora, tehorai, Elohai Neshama shenatata bi tehorai, Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorai. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehora, tehorai. One more time. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorai. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehorai. Elohai neshama shenatata bi tehora, tehorai. Having become aware of our bodies and become aware of the spirits that fill them, we want to become aware of the miracles that led us to this moment. Those miraculous moments that happen every day, and if we didn't name them and notice them, they would whiz past us. And I want to offer to you this practice that is a practice of mine that I've sometimes shared in this group, where we can acknowledge that each of these blessings of the Nisim B'chol Yom, which start on page 80, are acknowledgments of miracles that have already happened to us this morning, and we can root those in our physical body, which will involve actually moving. So give yourself some space to be able to situate yourself in your body, to feel the blood flowing through your veins, to feel what feels strong and what feels weak, and to notice these miracles that have already happened. We're gonna be present to each of them. So I'm not gonna distract myself with the chat for miracles. We're just gonna be present in these, but I want you to also be able to think about the miracles that you have experienced today that aren't on this list. So here we go. First, we start with our eyes closed in that moment before we wake up, where we notice that light is peeking in through our eyelids, but we've yet to open them, where we are aware that the day is beginning, that the world is continuing to spin, and that we continue to be in it. And we say these words, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has given the mind the ability to distinguish day from night. And then there's that moment, we're going to do it right as we say this blessing, where we open our eyes for the first time and the light streams in and we take in the day. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who opens the eyes of the blind. Then we are still laying in our beds and we start to move our body a little and start to feel our muscles again finding their strength as we renew ourselves in movement for this day. So we're going to move around a little bit as we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who frees the captive. And then would be that moment where you sit up for the first time in bed. So I want you to lean forward and then sit up straight so you can feel your spine stretch, feel every vertebra in your spine, each doing its own work to lift you up as you say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who lifts up the fallen. The next blessing is that blessing that Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu. Technical difficulties. The next blessing that we say is that blessing where we swing our legs over the edge of our bed, we place them on the ground, and we are marveling at the miracle that there is still ground to stand on. And we say, feel the ground underneath your feet and say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who stretches the earth over the waters. And then would be the moment where you stand up and feel the strength returning to your legs. So I'm going to invite you to actually stand up as you say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who strengthens our steps. And then it already happened to me, but when you stand up, you notice your clothes on your body in a different way. You are aware of your clothes hanging on you. You are aware of the miracle that it is that you had pajamas, and that maybe you've changed out of your pajamas this morning, and maybe you haven't, and that's beautiful either way. And maybe you've put on a talit, and maybe you haven't, but feel the miracle that is the clothes that wrap us in our bodies and keep us warm and keep us safe, and our expressions of who we are. And we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who clothes the naked. And then you're going to give a big stretch, that first important thing that you do in the morning, that you're going to feel the blood just reach every part of your body. You're going to feel all the strength returning to you that maybe left you in the night for a little bit. You're going to feel the miracle that is your body, and you're going to say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who gives strength to the weary. And then you're going to rub the last bit of sleep from your eyes, get rid of those last eye crusties, and you're going to say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who removes sleep from the eyes, slumber from the eyelids. And then you are going to look in the mirror, and you are going to marvel at this miracle that is your body, and you are going to marvel that you are a reflection of God in this world, as you say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me in the image of God. And knowing that you are made in the image of God, you marvel also at the fact that you have free will, that you are able to do God's work in this world, but always you have a choice. Always you can choose right over wrong. Always you can choose justice over injustice. Always you can choose peace over war, as we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me free. Then comes maybe one of the most challenging of these blessings for some of the people who are participating in this service. The next one, thanks God for making us Jews with a special understanding of how we can make a world that is more whole, that is more repaired. Some of you are Jews. Some of you are people who love Jews and care about Judaism. Some of you are on the journey to becoming Jews and looking forward to being able to say this prayer with the most authenticity. I think there may be one person who's watching who may be converted this week and is celebrating saying these words for the first time this week with the fullness of their meaning, as we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who has made me a Jew. Now you want to feel the strength that it gives you to know who you are and who you want to be in this world, as we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who girds Israel with strength. Then, if you were finishing getting ready in Judaism, in traditional Jewish practice, you might put a kippah on your head, whether you are a man or a woman, and you might say, this awareness, this kippah that I wear is a reminder that this is where I end, that there is more in this world than me, that I am a part of a larger system. And I might say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, who crowns Israel with splendor. Then you can be seated as we say one more blessing. The next thing that we would want to do as we wake up in the morning, the next miracle we would want to celebrate is the miracle of getting to learn in this world, getting to grow in this world, getting to discover all the Torah that is written throughout this world, as we offer these words at the top of 86, all in Hebrew. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. If you have other miracles that you, I just saw a comment in the chat that made me happy. Someone celebrating becoming Jewish. If you have other miracles that you thought of today, even though I won't have a chance to read them out loud, if you want to share them in chat so we can share them together as a community, that is beautiful. And we are going to continue with a little bit of study, which happens on page 88 with the words of Elu Devarim. These are the things that are limitless, of which a person enjoys the fruit of the world while the principle remains in the world to come. They are honoring one's father and mother, engaging in deeds of compassion, arriving early for study morning and evening, dealing graciously with guests, visiting the sick, providing for the wedding couple, accompanying the dead for burial, being devoted in prayer, and making peace among people. But the study of Torah encompasses them all. There is a the next prayer that we say in our community on Shabbat, because we skip a couple of pages, is on page 100. It's Psalm 150. Psalm 150 is beautiful. It is this list of instruments, this list of all the different instruments one might use to praise God. And then after that comes this last line, Kol hanishama tehalel ya, hallelujah. Every soul, every person with breath can praise God, hallelujah. And it is a reminder that the band that we would make, the joyful, praiseful band of all these instruments is incomplete without each of our individual voices. That we all have a voice that we play in this melody that is the praise of God. And there is one melody of this prayer that really captures this for me. What I love about it is that it's a round. And that you can hear each of those individual voices in their own time and in their own way contributing to this larger whole. Of course, it is very hard for me to sing around by myself. I thought about getting out my loop pedal, but I didn't have the courage. And it's hard for me to sing around by myself. So what I wanted to offer of this last line of Psalm 150 is a beautiful choral video of that psalm. And I'm gonna share my screen again, and we will. I encourage you to find your own voice in this melody and to sing along loudly and proudly in the work of praising God. So, with that intention of finding our own voice and our own breath, and the possibility of all of our voices contributing in some way to this project of praise and acknowledgement, I wanted to say something about poetry and why I bring so much poetry in services normally, and then even more this week because I have sort of a poetry themed service. And some of you have heard me do this spiel before, and I apologize for the review. But I do think it's worth saying, which is we have this challenge when we read the prayer book. My professor in rabbinical school used to like, Dr. Larry Hoffman used to like to say that we tend to think of books as either fiction or nonfiction, as either true or false. And when you look at something like a description of God creating the universe, or a description of God giving the Torah to human beings, there is this risk that you will look at a prayer and ask yourself, is this fiction or nonfiction? Is this true or false? And that's problematic, because if you want to assess the historical truth or the scientific truth, certainly the world did not come into being in the ways that Genesis describes. Certainly one can historically understand the Torah as coming into being in a different way than the way that Exodus describes. But that's the wrong question, because absolutely there is truth to be gained in thinking of the world as created. There's truth to be gained in understanding the Torah as divinely given. And so what I love about poetry is that our brains know, even if you don't love poetry, even if you don't know a ton about poetry, our brains know that poetry doesn't fit into that dichotomy of true and false, fiction and nonfiction. If you read that line, two roads diverged in the wood and I've chosen the one less traveled, you don't think to yourself, well, did the poet actually come to two roads and did they actually choose one? You don't think that. You know that the poet is trying to say something true and enduring, even if it didn't happen that way. And poetry puts our brains in that mindset in the way that I think that prayer is also supposed to put in our brains in our mindset. We read a prayer, we don't necessarily have to say, did this happen, or do I agree with everything in this prayer? We can open ourselves up to the possibility of what does this prayer have to teach, in the same way that we open ourselves to the poem and say, what does this poem have to teach me? And so the reason I bring poetry in services, and the reason that I brought extra poetry this morning, is that it is, I think, great brain training and heart training for how we might enter ourselves into prayer, the way we would pour ourselves into a poem to say, how is this poem speaking to me? What is this poem asking of me? What is this poem challenging me to do? In the same way that we might say, how is this prayer on this morning speaking to me? How is it challenging me? What is it asking me to do? So as we prepare for the Baruch Hu this morning, the second of multiple beginnings in our service, I wanted to offer you this poem by Václav Havel called "It Is I Who Must Begin." It is I who must begin. Once I begin, once I try, here and now, right where I am, not excusing myself by saying things would be easier elsewhere, without grand speeches and ostentatious gestures, but all the more persistently to live in harmony with the voice of being, as I understand it within myself. As soon as I begin that, I suddenly discover to my surprise that I am neither the only one, nor the first, nor the most important one to have set out upon that road. Whether all is really lost or not depends entirely on whether or not I am lost. As we seek to lose ourselves in prayer and be a little less lost in this world, we turn to page 108 and rise for the Baruch Hu. Yai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai 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 dai. Yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai. Yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai. Barechu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Yai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai 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 dai. There is, I mentioned before that there is some spiritual value in I'm going to sit so that I can talk to you. There is some spiritual value in thinking of the world as having been created, and part of that is just about the value of thinking about the world and understanding our place in it. And there are all sorts of organizations that exist to try and figure out if we are alone in the universe. Organizations like SETI that are searching to answer the question, is there life elsewhere? And other than maybe small microbial life that we have found on places like that used to exist in places like Mars, we've certainly never seen any evidence of a life that can comprehend a question like, is there other life in the universe besides us? And when you think about the world in that way, when you think about the fact that we might be alone as intelligent life in the universe on this planet, we can feel small. Small in the way that when we look at this picture of the Earth from the moon, we realize how small we are, how even though there are billions of people on this planet, we are all occupying this one very small corner of space. But we might also be aware in that moment that we might be the only mechanism the universe has ever created to appreciate itself. That we might be the only mechanism the universe has ever created to ask questions about the universe, to explore the universe, to reach out towards the stars with hope and longing. And if we are the only mechanism that the universe has created, then we have a special responsibility to do that work, to appreciate the universe in its glory, to appreciate our place in it, to appreciate the fact that we have to protect the life and dignity of all those other billions of human beings on this planet who have this important responsibility, because we might be all there is. There is this poem called by Winsława Szymborska, who wrote this poem called The Ball, that captures in some way this mood, which will be our Yotzer Or for this morning. As long as nothing can be known for sure, no signals have been picked up yet, as long as Earth is still unlike the nearest or more distant planets, as long as there's neither hide nor hair of other grasses graced by other winds, of other treetops bearing other crowns, other animals as well grounded as our own, as long as only the local echo has been known to speak in syllables, as long as we still haven't heard word of better or worse Mozarts, Plato's, Edison's somewhere, as long as our inhuman crimes are still committed only between humans, as long as our kindness is still incomparable, peerless even in its imperfection, as long as our heads packed with illusions still pass for the only heads so packed, as long as the roofs of our mouths alone still raise voices to high heavens. Let's act like very special guests of honor at the district fireman's ball, dance to the beat of the local Oompa band, and pretend it's the ball to end all balls. I can't speak for others. For me, this is misery and happiness enough. Just this sleepy backwater where even the stars have time to burn, or winking at us unintentionally. Baruch atah Adonai Yotzer HaMeorot. A blessing for Torah, top of page 113. Once or twice in a lifetime, a man or woman may choose a radical leaving, having heard Lech Lecha, go forth. God disturbs us towards our destiny by hard events and by freedom's now urgent voice, which explode and confirm who we are. We don't like leaving, but God loves becoming. Baruch atah Adonai habocher be'amo Yisrael be'ahava. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leholam Vaed. Page 116. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol meodecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'elech asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta ba'am b'shivtecha b'veitecha uv'lechtecha v'aderech uv'shachbecha uv'kumecha ukshartam le'od al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha uchtavtam המזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם. Top of page 117. When justice burns within us like a flaming fire, when love evokes willing sacrifice from us, when, to the last full measure of selfless devotion, we demonstrate our belief in the ultimate triumph of truth and righteousness, then your goodness enters our lives and we can begin to change the world. And then you live in our hearts, and we, through righteous deeds, behold your presence. Mi chamocha, page 122. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha ne'edar b'kodesh, nora tehilot osef eleh, nora tehilot osef eleh. Shira chadasha, shibechu geulim, l'shimcha al svat hayam. Yachad kulam hodu, vehimlichu ve'amru, Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed, Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. Yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai 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 dai. And now, as we enter into the Amidah, as we prepare for yet another beginning in our service, a poem called Begin by Rumi, because no poetry service would be complete without a Rumi poem, to prepare us, and then we will rise for the Amidah. This is now. Now is all there is. Don't wait for then. Strike the spark, light the fire, sit at the beloved's table, feast with gusto, drink your fill, then dance the way branches of jasmine and cypress dance in a spring wind. The green earth is your cloth. Tailor your robe with dignity and grace. We rise for the Amidah, which begins on page 124. Adonai sifatai tiftachu fi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu v'imoteinu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor, v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, v'Konei Hakol, v'Zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, מוריד הטל, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, צומח נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומידו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל, ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרון, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרב זה אל זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, מלוא כל הארץ כבודו. אדיר אדירנו אדוני אדוננו מאדיר שמך בכל הארץ, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אחד הוא אלוהינו, הוא אבינו הוא מלכנו, הוא מושיענו והוא ישמיענו, ברחמיו לעיני כל חי. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהיך ציון לדור ודור. הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. You may be seated. For our blessing for Shabbat. Shabbat, which is a time to take a breath and be ourselves, to appreciate the wonders in us and around us. I'll offer this poem called Camas Lilies by Lynn Unger. Consider the lilies of the field, the blue banks of camas, opening into acres of sky along the road. Would the longing to lie down and be washed by that beauty abate if you knew their usefulness? How the natives ground their bulbs for flour, how the settlers' hogs uprooted them, grunting in gleeful oblivion as the flowers fell. And you? What of your rushed and useful life? Imagine setting it all down, papers, plans, appointments, everything, leaving only a note. Gone to the field to be lovely. Be back when I'm through with blooming. Even now, unneeded and uneaten, the camas lilies gaze out above the grass from their tender blue eyes. Even in sleep your life will shine. Make no mistake, of course your work will always matter. Yet Solomon, in all his glory, was not arrayed like one of these. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh haShabbat. Blessed are you, God, who sanctifies Shabbat. We have, at this moment in services of late, been praying for peace in Israel. And I am grateful, relieved for the ceasefire this week, tenuous and tentative as it is. And I am reminded in that tenuousness of this poem that I adore by the Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai called Wild Peace, where he compares, where he asks for a kind of peace that is like wild flowers. And he acknowledges in the poem the difficulty of living in a society that is dripping with and shaped by violence. And he acknowledges the generational nature of this conflict and of the impact that it has. And I believe that he is acknowledging that impact both on Israelis and on Palestinians. He is acknowledging that peace is difficult and a necessity. And that he believes that peace will come not because it is inherently in us, but because it has to come. He has this line at the end, let it come like wildflowers suddenly, because the field must have it. And it is my prayer, and I'll share the poem with you in a minute. It is my prayer this morning that peace will come because the field must have it. That this situation of mutual dehumanization is untenable and harms all of our souls, as well as the lives who it most directly affects. And I offer to you this poem, Wild Peace by Yehuda Amichai, as a prayer for not a perfect peace, but a peace that is the peace that we need, even if it's not the peace that we deserve. Wild Peace by Yehuda Amichai. Not the peace of a ceasefire, not even the vision of the wolf and the lamb, but rather, as in the heart when the excitement is over, and you can talk only about great weariness. I know that I know how to kill, and that makes me an adult. And my son plays with a toy gun that knows how to open and close its eyes and say, Mama. A peace without the big noise of beating swords into plowshares, without words, without the thud of the heavy rubber stamp. Let it be light, floating like lazy white foam. A little rest for the wounds. Who speaks of healing? And the howl of the orphans is passed from one generation to the next, as in a relay race, the baton never falls. Let it come like wildflowers, suddenly, because the field must have it. Wild peace. We're going to sing a prayer for peace, Sim Shalom. Then we're going to take a few moments for silent prayer, and then we're going to use the power of video to let Cantor Simmons lead us in another prayer for peace. Oseh Shalom. Sim Shalom, page 140. Sim, 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 shalom, sim, 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 shalom, sim, 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 shalom, tova uveracha. Sim, 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 shalom, sim, 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 shalom, sim, 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 shalom, tova uveracha. Ya da 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 ya da da ya da 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 ya da da ya da 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 ya da da sim, 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 shalom, sim, sim, sim shalom, sim shalom, tova uveracha. We take a few moments now for silent prayer and gratitude.
Shalom bimroma, uyasei shalom aleinu. Ose shalom bimroma, uyasei shalom aleinu. Ose shalom bimroma, uyasei shalom aleinu. Yasei shalom, yasei shalom. Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom. Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Oseh shalom bimromav, uyaseh shalom Aleinu. Ose shalom bimromav, uyaseh shalom aleinu. Ose shalom bimromav, uyaseh shalom aleinu. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
I didn't feel like I could deprive you of at least a little bit of Cantor Simmons on a Shabbat morning. So we are going to move now to our part of the service where we are focused on Torah. We will warm ourselves up for that with the words of Ki Mitzion, which begin on page 246 and then continue at the top of page 248. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah u'devar Adonai meYerushalayim. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah u'devar Adonai meYerushalayim. Baruch shenatan Torah le'amo Yisrael. Baruch shenatan Torah le'amo Yisrael v'kedushato ki mitzion tetzei Torah u'devar Adonai meYerushalayim. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah u'devar Adonai meYerushalayim. So, there have been a lot of causes for weeping. there have been a lot of causes for tears in the last 15 months, in the last days, and in the last week. And I am struck by the fact that this Shabbat marks the 1-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd. And it feels hard for me to believe that it has been a whole year. Hard for me to believe that our world feels different and shaken by that event, and yet not all that different. And there are so many people who have done so much crying. And in this last 2 weeks, with the ongoing situation in Israel, with the pain and the fear of Israelis, and the pain and the fear of Palestinians, there have been so many reasons to cry and cry out. Rabbi Elazar says that though the gates of prayer may sometimes be closed, the gates of tears are never locked. There is a power in our weeping to crack open the gates of heaven, that tears and human empathy may be the key that unlocks a door in our prayers that might otherwise be closed. The crying may be the beginning point of prayer. And we have talked a lot this morning about prayer and peace, and trying to find what it means to pray for peace. And peace in the English parlance of that word has a connotation of ceasing to fight, ceasefires and ends of war. It has a connotation of something that is lovely and light, that can seem almost Pollyanna-ish, especially when we are weeping. The idea of peace in the face of racial injustice, the idea of peace in the face of a generations-long conflict, at least peace in that way that we think of it in the English, it can feel naive. But peace in Judaism and in Hebrew is more complex than that. The Hebrew word shalom, as you may have heard me say before, comes from the root of shleimut, of wholeness, of unity. And the idea that is described in Jewish texts of what peace means is about unity within diversity. It starts from Genesis, from the very first words of the very first chapter of the Torah that describe that the world was chaos, tohu vavohu, chaos and unformed, and that the act of creation for God wasn't so much a creation of something out of nothing, but rather an ordering of chaos into order. On the first 6 days of creation, God says it is good. And on the seventh day of creation, God says it is or on the sixth day, the first 5 days, God says it's good. On the sixth day, God looks at it and says it is very good. The rabbis wonder, why does God say very good? And their answer, one of their answers, is that God sees in its totality all of creation, all of this ordered universe, all of the ways that God has set at bay that chaos. And that's what God sees as uniquely good. The peace that we pray for in Judaism is finding again that order, that wholeness, where disparate parts can work together towards a meaningful whole. And there is an awareness in Jewish tradition that this is difficult and not even necessarily natural. Joseph Albo, who was a Jewish Spanish philosopher, writes that the nature of the universe, he understands entropy, even though that word probably hadn't been invented yet. He understands that the nature of things is to tend towards a little bit of chaos. He writes, each opposing element seeks to overcome and vanquish the other. Inside an object, there are these forces that he understands that are trying to overcome each other. And once it has overcome the other, it will not rest until it has absolutely destroyed it and wiped it out of existence, says Alba. And the complete object will thus cease to exist. When we succumb to that chaos and entropy, it can destroy us from within. Conciliation between these two opposing elements, says Albo, is called peace. And on its account, being is sustained, and the composite entity can continue to exist. When we seek to take those opposing elements and to bring them not into entropy but into harmony, that is how we continue to exist. Makes me think of the situation in Israel, Palestine, and this awareness that there is this desire, forces on both sides, not the majority of people, but forces on both sides that seek to destroy each other, that believe that one cannot exist if the other exists, and that they will ensure, if they are allowed to continue, that will happen. They will ensure that the system devolves. But to make peace is to bring together opposing elements, to try and find unity within diversity, not to make unity that erases individuality, not to make a unity that says that we can't be different, but to find wholeness in the ways that our differences complement each other. I don't mean to oversimplify one of the most complex situations in the entire world. But the peace that I am praying for when I pray for peace in Israel is that peace. Is a peace that respects the dignity of the individuality of every human being in the region, that understands that every human being in the region has a right to self-determination, has a right to living a life of freedom, and that works to ensure, to build a world where those opposing forces can be in that kind of harmony. And I think about that in terms of racial justice too. I think about our so far failure to live in a world where diversity is understood as the thing that makes us whole and not the thing that makes us broken. And the work of justice is the work of finding wholeness in our diversity. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel teaches that the world is maintained by three things: by justice, by truth, and by peace. And then Rav Muna comes along and adds to him that there these three things are actually one: justice, truth, and peace. He says if justice is present, then truth will prevail, and this is what makes peace. For Rav Muna, the starting place of peace, the starting place of that wholeness in diversity, is in justice and in truth. That if we can find fairness, if we can assert truth, that's how we make that wholeness in diversity. That's how we make that wholeness in peace. And there is, in this week's Torah portion, Parshat Naso, a reminder of this. The Naso is a weird portion because it's sort of some random things. It starts out with a conversation about two priestly families and their special responsibilities when the tabernacle would travel. Then there is this very upsetting passage called the Sota ritual, which was a ritual for what to do if a husband accused his wife of adultery. And then there is a passage on the Nazarite, on this weird category of someone who wasn't a priest but could sort of assume upon themselves a level of holiness and priesthood by changing their behavior, by not drinking and not cutting their hair. And then there is maybe the oldest passage in the entire Torah, and one of the oldest blessings in continual use in the entire world, which is the priestly blessing. May God bless you and keep you. May God's light shine on you and be gracious to you. May God lift God's face to you and give you peace. And then there is this very annoying passage, which is a description of the gifts, the offerings that each tribe brought through the prince of each tribe, and it lists each one individually, except that they all bring the same offering. So it's 12 times of this exact same formula. And the Torah, which doesn't often waste words, why would there be all this repetition? And the question that the rabbis ask is, what do all these things have to do with each other? All these sort of random topics, what's the unifying principle of Parshat Naso? And Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs teaches that the unifying principle of Naso is peace. And he explains it this way. He says that those rules about the special roles of these different priestly families is contrasted with they seem to be happy with that role and grateful for the role that they have to play in the Jewish people, their unique role. And that's compared to the other priestly families mentioned in last week's Torah portion, which is the family that Korach, the rebel, comes from, who his major complaint is how come I get this and not that? The Sota ritual, as upsetting as it is the only place where part of the ritual is you write God's name on a piece of paper and you dissolve that paper in water. And it's forbidden in Judaism to erase God's name except in the context of this ritual. And the rabbis teach that the reason that God allows for God's name to be erased in this way is because peace between a husband and wife, the possibility of restoration between a husband and wife in the situation where there might be danger of hatred or abuse, is so important to God that God humbles God's self, that God is willing to set aside the sacredness of God's own name in order to preserve peace between partners. And then we have this scene at the end of the portion, which is this scene that is all of these different tribes, and the emphasis seems to be on each tribe's unique offering and the equality between those offerings. So the Torah goes out of its way to share all of these offerings, each individually, to say each tribe had something to bring, each was equal in its contribution, and so that is that message of unity and diversity. And Sachs says that the most interesting one perhaps is the Nazarite, is this special role that you can take on yourself, because there's this tension in Judaism where we're all supposed to be holy and equal. We're told we are a kingdom of priests, and yet there are these priests, the Kohanim, who have this special holy role that isn't accessible to the general Israelite. And in order to make peace within this sort of necessary hierarchy, there is this role that God creates of the Nazirite that allows someone to assume upon themselves some of what is exclusively otherwise given to the Kohanim. And so that this rule is about making peace by allowing individuals to strive for holiness in ways that might otherwise be cut off to them. So according to Rabbi Sachs, all of these rules in Nassau are around this theme of peace. And certainly the priestly blessing, which ends with the word peace, as so many of our blessings do, emphasizes this theme that this whole Torah portion is about making peace amongst leaders, and the special responsibilities leaders have to keep and maintain peace, making peace among partners, making peace amongst neighbors, and making peace amongst tribes in this world. And the last thing that I wanted to say is, if we had prayed the Hebrew of Yotzer, we didn't because I brought a poem, but if we prayed the Hebrew of Yotzer this morning, we would have said the words, Yotzer or uvarei choshech osei shalom uvarei atakol. The one who forms light and darkness, who makes peace and creates everything. And peace is an interesting word in that sentence. But the most interesting word in that sentence might be oseh. We ask for God to make peace. God Yotzer creates light and darkness. God Voreh everything. God creates everything. Yotzer and Boreh are both words for creation. But God Oseh, God makes peace. God doesn't create peace out of nothing. God makes peace in the world. Remember, I said that God didn't create the universe out of nothing. God made peace by creating order where there was chaos. And I think it's a reminder every time we say those words, Oseh Shalom, make peace, that we have a role to play in making peace. It's not something we wait for God to create. It's something that we partner with God to make in this world, that we have to form it, that it's work, that it is challenge. And our calling is to be makers of peace, not just enders of war, but makers of harmony. Makers of this feeling that has always been absent from the world, but has always been our aspiration, which is this idea that there lives within diversity the possibility of wholeness, that there lives within diversity the possibility of unity. And as we think on this Shabbat, as we are maybe wiping away some tears, or maybe still weeping, as we think about this anniversary of the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, and the reckoning that we have done in this last year around race, both as individuals and as a nation, and the work we still have to do both as individuals and as a nation around race. As we think about this tenuous ceasefire in Israel, about the damage that has been done just in the last 2 weeks of Israelis to Palestinians, Palestinians to Israelis, neighbors, as well as governments. We think about that idea of being peacemakers, of being those people in the world who can help God, Oseh Shalom, make peace in this world, fight for peace in this world. Maimonides teaches that the whole Torah was given to us to make peace in this world. That the message, not just of Nassau, but of every law in the Torah, is ultimately about how do we bring a world closer to that shleimut, closer to that wholeness, closer to that peace, closer to that possibility. So our work, our challenge, our opportunity on this Shabbat of Nassau is to bring the blessing of peace to the world. In just a minute, I'm going to read that priestly blessing. Words that are maybe 500 years older than the Dead Sea Scrolls, that people, even before there was something recognizable as Judaism, people offered each other these words of holiness. And we're going to marvel together at the way that they are ultimately about reminding us that we can be sources of blessing in this world, and in particular, we can be sources of peace in this world. That's our challenge and our opportunity. And it's a challenge and opportunity I look forward to taking up with you. So with that, let's read a little Torah and hear those ancient words. I start with a little of Nazarites just to sort of finish off that point. Then we get to the commandment for this ancient blessing. Zot Torat Hanazir Asher Yidor Korbano Ladonai El Nizro Milvad Asher Tasig Yado Kifi Nidro Asher Yidor Ken Yaseh Al Torat Nizro Vaydaber Adonai El Moshe Lemor Daber El Aharon Ve'el Banav Lemor Ko Tivarchu Et Bnei Yisrael Amor Lahem Yivarechecha Adonai V'yishmerecha Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. Yisa Adonai panav elecha ve'asem lecha shalom. V'samu et shemi el bnei Yisrael va'ani avarchem. While words of Torah are in our midst, we want to offer a blessing for healing, a prayer for the possibility of another kind of shlemut, of wholeness. And we offer these words of Misha Beirach for all those in our lives who are struggling with acute and chronic illness. The words of Misha Beirach are found on page 253. Misha Beirach Avoteinu Mikor HaBracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misha Beirach Imotenu Mikor HaBracha Le'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. A few brief announcements on this Shabbat, and I have to look at them. I don't just know them off the top of my head. That's right. On Sunday, tomorrow, our Sisterhood's New Tradition gift shop will have a sidewalk sale from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Outside, all items will be 50% off and will be tax-free shopping. So please join us for that. The Emmanuel Running Club continues to meet Wednesdays at 7:45 a.m. in the West parking lot. Whether you walk or run, all are invited to join us as we make our way around the Rice University Loop. And finally, just a reminder, we are in phase 4 of our reopening plan. If you're interested in joining us for Shabbat worship on Friday nights, you can sign up for that in advance on our website. We'll continue to share updates with the congregation as things continue to develop. As we move to the conclusion of our service and prepare for Mourner's Kaddish, one more short poem called Fire Flowers by Emily Pauline Johnson. And only where the forest fires have sped, scorching relentlessly the cool north lands, a sweet wild flower lifts its purple head, and, like some gentle spirit sorrow fed, it hides the scars with almost human hands. And only to the heart that knows of grief, of desolating fire, of human pain, there comes some purifying sweet belief, some fellow feeling beautiful if brief, and life revives and blossoms once again. Take a moment now for silent memory. We think of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we've drawn into our hearts with our own. Zichronam livracha, may their memories be for a blessing. Our hearts go out in sympathy to the family of Robert Browning, who's laid to rest in recent days. We turn to page 294 and rise together as one community, in body or in spirit, for the words of Mourner's Kaddish, 294. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divrach chirutei ve'almich malchutei, v'chayechon u'yomechon u'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, va'agala u'vizman kariv ve'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam omea maya, v'yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitchomam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yithaleh v'yithalal shmei d'kudsha brichu, va'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'ne'emata, Dami Rambe Ama v'imru Amen. Yehei Shlama Rabba min Shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Osei Shalom b'mrumav, huya asei Shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. May the one who makes peace on high help us to make peace for all Israel, for all those who dwell on earth, to which we say, Amen. Osei Shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. We continue with Kiddush. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei Peri Hagafen Chaim. And Motzi. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Thought for a closing song today, we would do on page 343, Ozi v'zimrat ya. I love this line. I sing it to my kids all the time, and I love to mistranslate it because Ozi can also mean strong. Zimra can also mean song, and so I like to say that it is my strength and the song of God that will be for me salvation. And I love the idea that that salvation in this world, that wholeness in this world, that peace and possibility in this world exist somewhere at the intersection between the strength we find in ourselves and the song that we hear buzzing through the universe, that is the song of God. So I hope you will join me in singing this prayer for accessing our strength in that song. Ozi v'zimradia vayehi li lishua. 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 My strength and the song of God, they will be for me a salvation. My strength and the song of God, they will be for me a salvation. My strength and the song of God, let them be for me a salvation. My strength and the song of God, let them be for me a salvation. Ozi v'zimradia vayehi li lishua. 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 Source of song and strength, source of hope and possibility, source of spring and new beginnings. We pray that you will open our eyes to the miracles in our lives, that you will open our hearts to the pain of our neighbors, that you will open our arms to this hard and holy work of making peace in this world. We are grateful for the opportunity to be your partners, God, in that work of making peace. We thank you for the many blessings in our lives, and we say together, Amen. Ozi v'zimradia vayehi li lishua. Ozi v'zimradia vayehi li lishua. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for praying with me. See you soon.